Hello, hello. Few times. I just thought, let's bring it back. It's how do you deal with disappointment? But before we do that, as always, I have a new YouTube channel. And I need to leave my microphone alone here. I have a new YouTube channel, and if you, want to go there and subscribe, that would be a great pleasure. Maybe you're already listening to YouTube. If you do, then feel free to put on some comments if you have some questions already, or some other things. You can also actually become a member of our Facebook group, as many of you already are, which is of course also nice. And all the things that we do, by the way, this is Welcome to the Place at episode 206 already of Tell. We went a little bit fast from last week, to this week because I had two interviews. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Episode 206 of the Everyday Life Lesson podcast. And today we talk about how to deal with disappointment. And before we do that, we always let you know under what life energy the topic fall. Well, typically they can always fall under all five life energies, but today I'll put them mostly under the mental and creative energy. Disappointment and creative energy, that's kind of interesting, right? Yes. So the five life energies, they were first introduced in my book Broken Silence. Just a quick reminder: we have physical energy, we have mental energy, we have creative energy, and we have manifestation energy, and we have divine energy. If you know how to bring them all in good balance, that will have definitely, a good positive impact on your life, to say it that way. Or maybe you want to say it in a different way. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. For 2 weeks, Europe and the US time wise, we were an hour closer together, but now we put everything back into order. I'm 7 hours apart from the country that I was born in, the Netherlands. I'm still Dutch, of course, right? Next month I will be there. I'll talk about that maybe too as well. So yeah, five life energies, we talked about that already. And today we talk about how to deal with disappointment, right? How to deal with disappointment. It's maybe not such an exciting title, but disappointment is arguably, well, I don't argue so much about it. It's one of the keys for a successful life and a successful relationship, a relationships, I should say. Yeah. So let's first a little bit explore of is disappointment, is that an emotion or is that a feeling? Now, if you browse to Google or whatever search engine you use and you type in is disappointment a feeling or emotion, strangely enough, the people don't have a clear answer to that. Well, I'll give you one because I think I do have a clear answer on that, at least from my perspective, right? I think disappointment is more a feeling than an emotion, right? But you can have a strong emotional reaction because of your disappointment. Now, I'm not going to explain in this podcast what the difference is between feeling and emotions. And in layman terms, it doesn't really matter so much. We use those words, interchangeable as if they're the same, but they're not. A very clear definition is, your emotion is very physical, right? An emotion is always has a physical outing, like crying, like yelling, like, transpiring. That's often shivering, whatever you have, that could be an emotional reaction. It's always expressed very physically, right? Feelings are more processed. You can actually ask someone about their feelings and they can describe it. So you have a feeling of disappointment, but your reaction could be very emotional. Does that make sense? Not a big deal, but it's just wanted to say that, right? So there are two ways actually to make sure that you don't have any disappointments, right? So the first way to never have any disappointments is maybe you should have more than one goal, right? And maybe you should even have conflicting goals, right? So that kind of offset your expectations, because disappointments always have to do with expectations that are not fulfilled, right? Does that make sense? So if you have, let's say, an expectation that goes two way, I am prepared to win and I'm prepared to lose, right? And if you do that really well, and then then maybe that offsets your disappointment. I'm not sure if that works, but some people write about that. And one day I was I'm not going to mention name here because I have the fullest respect for those people, but we were following the World Championship Latin American dancing. Back in the 90s, and there was like this battle between two couples, and then one couple won, and the other couple who was actually expected to win did not win, and you could see the emotions in that other couple, because the disappointment was huge. And of course the other one, the expectations were not that high, so the emotions were also very huge, but then in a positive way. The next year, those same two couples were actually again in the final, and it was again between those two couples. And the couple that lost the year before um, was interviewed, and they asked that couple, um, how did you prepare for this competition last year? You were, hoping to win, of course, and you didn't. And then one of the people in that couple said, yeah, last year we were only prepared to win, and this year we are also prepared to lose. Now, to be honest, I have to get my head around it, because I'm a mental coach for competitive athletes, mostly in competitive dancing. And I always say, you need to go and prepare yourself to win, right? And if you lose, then we'll talk about that later, right? Most people lose, actually. If you think about it, if they're only one number one place, then most people lose, right? But anyhow, so that was it. I thought it was odd, but maybe it's a good way. Maybe that's one of the things that you could do. Can you have multiple goals if it comes to the same thing that you want to achieve? And would that lower down your disappointment, if that is what you want to do, right? Um, so let me change something here real quick. And the other thing is, and I lived by that for a while. I think I was disappointed in things in life, I guess, maybe as a young person, I don't know. And then I started to have this life motto saying, if you have no expectations, then you have no disappointment. So if you have no expectations in life, then you also have no disappointments in life. And just for a short while, I thought I was super smart and super clever. And then I thought, wow, but you also take all the juice out of life too, right? It is kind of exciting to have some goals and some expectations. And lately I say, you need to have expectations if you want to live a life of passion and purpose, and you want to go after your dreams, right? Then of course there are expectations in there. And with expectations, inevitably, you have disappointments at times. It's just part of life. So maybe it is just more about managing or dealing with disappointment than just preventing them, right? Preventing disappointment, we can talk about that. Or if you have questions about it, write it, in Facebook or in YouTube, wherever you follow this, and I will try to answer that too. But I think just disappointment is part of life, and maybe it's more interesting to see how you deal with it, and maybe there's another way to do it too. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, right? So maybe I call that reframing your mindset when disappointment happens is maybe something more wise to do than just trying to prevent disappointment, which could actually make your life pretty flat. Multiple goals sounds like that's a little bit hard to do, and no expectations in life is maybe even impossible. Yeah. So that's one thing. Um, Now, how can you think about these things slightly different? Let me just talk about that for a little bit. So if you talk to a Buddhist, for instance, and not all Buddhists, not that I talk to Buddhists every day, but I talk to some of them once in a while, and I often ask her, "How do you guys deal with it?" Well, that's typically not how the conversation goes, but that's I'm pretending that I have that. And they say, let me think a little bit about expectations. Expectations, a Buddhist would say, has always something to do with desire. And if you can live your life without any desire, then hence you would also have no disappointment. And although the Buddha says that is really hard to do, of course, to live with a desire, but here comes something in that they use in meditation as well. If you find out what your big desires are, maybe you want to have a new car, let's say that's all, you want to win a competition, or you want to be happy in a relationship, or whatever your desire are. Maybe it's just you want to have vanilla ice cream. That could also be a desire. Don't think you should meditate about that, or maybe you should actually, because it's a nice thing to think about. Vanilla ice cream is one of my favorite flavors of ice cream. Oh, I'm in my usual self. Do you know that I digress like a maniac? And so sorry, let's bring it back. But the sun is shining here and it's getting hot. We're putting on t-shirts again. So I'm thinking about ice cream. And if I don't get ice cream, maybe I get disappointment. So coming back to the Buddhist, is if you can meditate over your desire and why you think you need that, and you can just sit in the desire, then it kind of goes away. That's a little bit the theory. That's a little bit the thought behind it. You kind of already relive and live that expectation, and because that you do that, the level of disappointment would not be as big, and also you will not be driven so much by desires that are maybe not so important, like having a new car or having a new house or having all these things that we sometimes think are so important in life. And then when we have them, on hindsight, then actually it is not so much about, it was not so great as you thought it was. Maybe it was a girl that you were in love with your whole life in I don't know, in high school, and then finally you had a date, and then suddenly you think, actually, she's not as nice as I thought she was. Or you win a championship which you have worked for your whole life, and you think like, hey, maybe, I must say I've been a pretty successful athlete, so I had some great successes, and and that moment when you get your first prize, or sometimes it was a second, but it was very often, I must say, not to do all this, but it was very often a first prize, and it always had meaning for me. But the first time when you were thinking about getting that first prize, it's become such a huge story in your mind that you think all the things that in your life will change. So this is a thing to think about it. Actually, when you get it, a lot of the things don't change. And then of course always you hear all these talks about, it's not about the result, it is about the journey. And of course it's true, right? The disappointment is if you put everything only on the results and not about the journey. But you will figure that out when you go there, right? You will go there, and you will become first or second or third. Those are good places to have, I guess. Third feels always, second is a little bit worse than third almost, because that's not even, not even first. And if you're third, you're still on the little podium, right? But anyhow, so it is the first time that happened to me. I was super happy, but did it really change? Right? Maybe the day after I was still a little bit euphoric. That's a little bit how I am, and then after that, things didn't change so much. Sometimes actually change for the worst. Sometimes I definitely know that I had my worst competitions often after I had my biggest successes, because I had a little bit of mentality. See, I'm arrived. I did everything already. The next time it will be a piece of cake. And what I forgot is that the next time you need to work as hard for it, if not harder, to achieve the same thing. Now, if you're an athlete, that is maybe something that you want, but sometimes you also can get into some sort of a trap where you feel that you have to perform every time on the same level instead of seeing it as a new event, and then your expectations becoming higher and higher and your disappointment becoming bigger and bigger. So that's kind of what could happen specifically with athletes. It's a process that they can go through. Now, some of you might say, yeah, I mean, you're talking about athletes that at least make the first place all the time. And what are they complaining about? Well, it's just a different thing that they get into. We sometimes think that top athletes have the best mindset there is. Yes, to achieve their goal, yes, but to maintain their goals and to maintain their results, that's a whole different thing, and it's a whole different level of disappointment. Now, here again, you might say, "Well, I'm not there yet. Why should I be concerned?" Well, maybe you shouldn't, but I'm just saying that disappointment comes in various forms and fashions. And I'm going to mention a few because that's just what I want to do. Is Let me pull up quickly a little sheet that I've prepared. I thought I had it on my notes right in front of me, but I don't. That's okay. You know, I hope you think it's okay because I have it right here, right? You have actually, well, you have more than one disappointment, as I say, but I'm going to give you a little bit of highlights of three of them, right? You have disappointment of your preferences, right? We call that the disappointment of preferences. And that has something to do with saying, hey, I'm going to, let's go, let's stay with the ice cream. Let's go, I wanted to get vanilla ice cream. And I go to my favorite ice cream shop, and oh they are out of vanilla ice cream, and that could be a disappointment, right? Is that a huge thing? Well, if you have kids, that could be a huge thing, right? If you're an adult, maybe not so much. They say, okay, I'll take pistachio. But I know my kids, when they had their mindset on one thing and it's not there, oh my gosh, that could be. And even if I say, but now maybe we can do tomorrow something else, whatever, it doesn't always work, right? It's a disappointment of preferences, right? That's what it is, and it's of expectations. And it could be as simple as if you live with a partner and you come home and you kind of prefer that the dinner is served when you come home, and maybe it became a habit that's that the case, and the one time that's not the case, that could be a huge thing, right? So that we call that the disappointment of preferences. Most of the time, you know, it's not a big deal. It could be a big deal, right? So because I prefer that my team, I used to like. I don't watch it so much anymore since I live in the U.S. But I used to like watch soccer in my hometown. Well, it's not my hometown game, but my team. But the team that I always was rooting for was Ajax in Amsterdam. And don't boo me if that's not your team, but that's just my team. And of course, I prefer that they win, but they don't always win. So that's a disappointment. But the way we deal with it is, say, there's next week there's another game or something like that, right? So disappointment of of preferences. Now you have also the disappointment that has a lot to do with your ego, right? What you believe in. That if someone criticizes you, right? And if someone gives you critique, like, oh my gosh, that can feel like a huge disappointment. Specifically, if, for instance, I did an interview and then you ask people some feedback and you get actually pretty tough critique, that could feel as a disappointment. Does that make sense? Or you do something for someone else and the person actually doesn't appreciate what you do and they critique at you or even disagree what you did, right? Sometimes maybe even is insulted what you do, right? You made a joke and the joke was not accepted really well. We saw it, by the way, in the Oscars this past weekend. That's a disappointment of the ego, right? Does that make sense? So that could just come out in rage and anger even. So that often hits way harder home than the disappointment of preferences. Doesn't always has to be the case, but that's the case. And then the third category is that has a lot to do with your values, right? And it has something to do with the appreciation that someone has in you or the respect. If you are a teacher and your students don't always treat you with respect, now I don't say that you have to get respect by asking for it, but it's sometimes a thing that can be very disappointing, right? If a student just go away or just take whatever you teach them for granted, things like that, right? I'm just taking things that are coming out of my life as well. So that are the values that you have. If you give someone your love and it doesn't come back, things like that. If you or that also has to do with where you feel safe, and when something gets stolen from you, that could be a disappointment, right? And then you feel that you didn't protect yourself really well. So that's a disappointment of values, right? The loss of something, the loss of respect, the loss of love, the loss of meaning and purpose in life sometimes, what's a cause of depression. So disappointment can have a very deep ripple effect in your life and in your feelings and emotional life, to put those two things together. Um, Now, you can then also follow a tactic. I just talk a little bit about it, is to how to regulate your disappointments, right? Because disappointment's a fact of life, but it's kind of you know it's a good way to see is, well, how serious is this disappointment. Now, when you have kids and the kids want to have vanilla ice cream, and vanilla ice cream is not there, that could be a disappointment. And if you look at that kid, you think, my gosh, they will never survive it. You know that they will, but the way they act is like, man, it's the end of life, because they don't want to have pistachio ice cream, they want to have vanilla ice cream. And so it's a good way also to look at it, and as an adult saying, hey, how serious is this actually, right? If so, for instance, if the ice cream, I can have that a little bit. Maybe I don't take any ice cream at all. It's not so good for my calories and stuff like that. So maybe it's a good thing that there was no ice cream in the refrigerator, maybe, or in the freezer, as we say here. So reframing your mind about the disappointment is actually super important. But before I go there, before I give you tips and tricks how to deal with disappointment, I just want to take it for a few minutes. To a slightly different level, because, as you know, I'm the writer and the author of the book Broken Silence, and that talks about abuse and how to deal with abuse. And hence I try to always, at least for a little bit, every topic that I take into the area of that is has something to do with the topic of my book. Now, why do some people take disappointment harder than other people? So why do some people take disappointment harder than people? Now, here is something that is actually maybe not so commonly known. Disappointment is also a compounded feeling. Yeah, it's a compounded feeling. So if it's the first time that you're disappointed in something, it doesn't hit you so hard. So if you are, working up to championships and you are in lineup of becoming number one, the first time that you don't make that number one, it's painful and it's not nice, but doesn't hit you so hard. The second time, although it's exactly the same thing, you just did not become number one again, right? But because it's the same thing, because it's the second time, I'm sorry, the feeling starts to compound. So, same thing in a relationship. If you expected something in a relationship and it happens over and over again, your disappointment becomes bigger and bigger, and hence the argument or the feeling around it can become. It could also be positive, by the way, it could also be a positive thing too. Um, but it works slightly different actually when it's positive. But maybe I'll say that something about that too. But so you could see that compounds. Now, how does that relate to what I was talking about with people with a traumatic experience, and specifically abuse and child abuse and abuse in life? So the disappointment that typical people with an abuse history have in people, without even saying it, right? It's just inside them, and that's clearly an emotion. It's a bodily felt emotion of disappointment and mistrust is already so big that if they are mistreated, could be by a completely different person, the reaction of an abused kid often is like, see, you can trust anyone. right? That feeling of that they have to do it alone is really, really big. So I want you all to ask a little bit compassion for that feeling. And when someone reacts like that, you can't trust no one. It's often because there is a pretty uh, damaged kid or a damaged person inside of that person that you talk to. So don't immediately throw at it. Of course, you can trust everyone. It just listen to what's going on there, and that's why disappointment for people with a traumatic experience is it's normally that's a harder to they have a harder time to cope with that. But the reason why that it is because the feeling of disappointment is always compounded. The first time that you are disappointed in someone, rightfully or wrongfully, doesn't really matter at this point in time. It becomes bigger and bigger. So not only for yourself but also for the people around you, it is really wise then to know how to deal with disappointment, because sometimes the disappointment might not even be rightfully so, right? If you're disappointment in someone else, then it's your expectation that you have towards the other person, and does that other person per se has to live up to your expectation? Now, I grew up with a dad who had in some areas, at least that's how I felt it. Maybe it's not even true, you know. I grew up with a dad, and who had we always believed that he had super high expectations of us. At least that's what I believed it was, right? It doesn't even matter he really had it or not. So I spent my life in trying to not disappoint my dad, and any boy who didn't have that can raise his hand, because a lot of boys have that. So nothing special, but it could give a really strong friction in in the relationship that you have, in this case my dad. And I realized that a lot of my sports accolades, I did actually not for myself. I did more to show to my dad that I was a great athlete. And so I converted myself to a dancer, and for me, of course, I wanted to have some achievement there too, but it was way less important because I did it way more for myself and the people that I love with and I did the dancing with, than to please someone else. And I'm not even sure that actually my dad expected that from me, but it was my belief. So disappointment is really tricky thing to go into. Right? Now let's go a little bit lighter to this and see how we can also, I have to put this on, um, how we can also mitigate or deal with disappointment. And I have maybe a little surprise for you at the end how I see this. I have a kind of a nice way to look at these things. Um, so first of all, don't personalize your disappointment, right? Very often, when you feel disappointed in something, it's not always geared towards you. Does that make sense? You might think it is, but it's very often not, right? So if you say, "Hey, I'm disappointed how this person behaves towards me," very often there is something else in that other person's life going on. Like I gave you that example of trust, and so that's it. Some people just might turn away from you because there are other things going on in their life, has nothing to do with you per se. Yeah. Then the other thing, don't generalize. Don't generalize to yourself, right? If you lost a competition, try to prevent to say to yourself, "I will never win it," right? Because it's one competition and there's always another competition, right? Or if in this case there's vanilla ice cream, they never have vanilla ice cream. And if you personalize it, see, yeah, they purposely put all the vanilla ice cream away for me. It always happens to me. That's personalizing things, right? Try not to do that. And not getting what you want at that instant doesn't mean that you don't deserve it. That's what a lot of people sometimes believe from themselves too. See, I don't deserve a happy life. If they are, again, sometimes in a broken relationship, then they might say, "Hey, I don't deserve," So try not to do that. Try not to project it to a larger thing than the case itself. That's basically, the advice that I have. Um, then is disappointment always bad? Well, actually, it sometimes is not. Sometimes when one door closes, the other one's open. So sometimes when you don't get hired for one job, you get hired for another job. And maybe even a better job than you firstly had. So your disappointment sometimes is just, a blessing in disguise. Let's put it that way. And then last but not least, well, it's not really last but not least, but last but not least, what commonly is taught about disappointment is often disappointment. There's a great learning in that, right? If you didn't win the competition, is it because you didn't deserve it? It's very seldomly for personal reasons that they didn't put you number one. It is just measured in a certain way, and you didn't measure up to that. So practice harder and learn what you did well and not do well, right? If it's, for instance, if you get critique and you're disappointed in that, is all the critique valuable? No, sometimes not. Sometimes you just have to, throw it away. But there's always a little percentage in the critique that you get, if it's not that positive, that actually you can do something with it. Now, I'm a pretty emotional guy. If someone critiques me, then I don't take that super well, to be honest, right? I typically close my mouth. But if I think about it and I'm just trying to filter out what is this person really saying, not how they are saying it, then often I find things that I can actually help, that helps me to improve myself. Not to please that other person. I might be, I don't know, not a nice person who's just a critical person for no reasons, right? But it does helps me. So that's another way to do it. But my most favorite way, by the way, to deal with disappointment is the following. So if you have not yet a pen and paper, this is the one that you need to write down. My most favorite way to deal with disappointment is change your expectations in curiosity. Change your expectations in curiosity. So I have some friends, and they're great friends, by the way. I have more than some friends, but I have great friends. But the specific couple that comes to mind, and they love to eat in the same restaurant, and they love to eat the same dish. And one of the reasons why that is because, I like that restaurant and I like that dish. And, why would I change something that I like already? And I always, I am almost the opposite. I don't like to eat twice in the same restaurant. And I definitely don't like to eat twice the same dish because I always want to try something new. But for them, it's always about, then we have this nice dinner and I'm disappointed in the food, right? For me, it's always like, I'm so curious what I can taste if I take a new dish. And okay, maybe I'm even curious to my own disappointment that I have in when I eat a new dish. So if I eat something and it's too spicy, for instance, and I'm even curious how I react to that new experience. It's not always about, for me in this case, trying to find a really positive experience per se, right? If a dish that you ordered doesn't taste so well. I mean, how big of a deal is that? You just have a new taste, and it might be not your taste or flavor that they served you, but it's a new experience. So if you can change most of the time your expectations into curiosity, then you can still have big, lofty goals. You don't have to change anything, but you will see that a lot of things change. Be even curious to your own disappointment, how you will react, how you deal with it, and how you recoup from it to go and do it another time, right? So that's it. That was Jean, and it was about how do we deal with disappointment. Hope you had some good takeaways from it this time. Don't forget to subscribe or join our Facebook groups. And I'll hope to see you back next time. Next week, it's already April, believe it or not, right? It's Tuesday, 12 o'clock Dallas time, 7 o'clock in the evening, Europe time, and everything somewhere in between. So this was Jean with The Place. I hope to see you back next time for another one. By the way, we have another interview coming up this week with an amazing dancer, and her name is M.A. Mendes. And I'll hope that you will listen to us then. I think it's this Thursday, actually. So, this was a busy week for The Place and Tell, the Everyday Life Lesson podcast. But with that, I'll say to you, bye-bye.